It was about 2 years ago. My mother lived with her stepfather in an apartment. Sometimes I spent the night with them. That day his stepfather was a weekend and my mother worked. He was half drunk, and when he drinks, he starts to brawl, pester everyone. And I got to hand. At first he just started a conversation with me, but soon I began to notice that he somehow touches me, translates into intimate topics. Damn, it started to scare me a little, and I just decided to go into the room. I do not know what he was thinking, but he followed me. But after a short conversation, he answered me directly, "You want to fuck?" At this moment I was so shocked. By the way, I'm a guy. Then I shouted at him and regretted it. He hit me with such force that I flew a tooth fragment. Anyway, he beat me up. When he left, I tried to escape, but he saw it and stabbed me in the leg. Fortunately I broke out, called the police, and I never saw him again. I say right away, I'm not English speaking, I don't know English grammar well. I hope you understand me. Okay, so this takes place back when I was in 6th grade. Me and 2 of my friends were home alone just hanging out when we heard a noise upstairs. The noise spooked us a little, but we forgot about it. 5 minutes later we heard another noise. This time we started freaking out a bit, so we went to investigate. We went upstairs and every door was closed and every room, 4, had the light on, which we definitely didn't leave that way. When we saw that, we ran back downstairs scared shitless. We checked the front and back door and they were locked, so we were very confused how someone could have gotten inside. But then we checked the basement door that is connected to the garage and it was left wide open. So at this point we knew someone was inside. We made a plan to try and find the intruder, so we grabbed my dad's shotgun and a couple knives. We went back upstairs to where we heard noises, and this time one room had the lights off. So we slammed the door open while pointing the shotgun inside. No movement or sound. We slowly crept into the room, turned on the light and decided to check the sliding closet. We did the same thing. Slammed it open with the shotgun pointing at it. Nothing. At this point we are terrified and have no idea what to do or where to look, and then we hear a small noise in the room next to us. Sounded like a squeak in the floor, and we booked it out of there and ran outside to the neighbors to call the police. While waiting for the police and watching the house from the neighbors, we saw all of the lights in the house turn off. The police got there and searched the house and didn't find anyone, but they asked if we left the back door open, and we said no. So apparently the intruder fled out the back door just before the police got there. That was by far the creepiest situation I've ever been in, lol. Keep in mind we were in 6th grade. I have no idea what would have happened if we saw the intruder, if we would have shot him, stabbed him, ran away, or hurt ourselves. I'm definitely glad we didn't end up seeing the person for those reasons. I used to live half a mile from a Dollar General. When I was a preteen/early teenager I would walk there. When I was 13 I was walking to the store to buy some candy. There was a problem with payment, so my cell phone didn't work. Thankful my mom made sure that she and my stepdad had service. Right before you got to the store you had to walk by this abandoned building. It used to be a store or something but fell into disrepair. That day there was a white 18-wheeler. As I'm walking past there's a guy outside of it. Since it was a parking lot I didn't want some kind of awkward silence, so I had a conversation while walking past. Me, hi. Guy, how are you? Me, I'm good. Nice to have sunshine. It had been raining the past couple days. Guy, it is. How old are you? Me, lying, 14. Guy, want sex? Me, no thank you. I then just kept walking and did not look back in silent panic. As soon as I got to the store I asked the cashier to borrow the store phone. I called my mom and asked her to pick me up. She asked why and I told her I would tell her when I see her. I didn't do anything wrong but was still worried I would be in trouble. She was at a different store so it took her a few minutes to get me. By the time she got me the truck was gone. She took me next door to talk to a neighbor who was a cop. He said with no name, license plate, or video not much could be done. He said we should go ahead and report it. I'm not sure if my mom ever did. He then told me I did everything right by not running or screaming from the guy, as he could have chased me. I wasn't allowed to walk there until I was 19. I eventually got a job there, but that incident still pops in my head sometimes. I'm probably way too late to the party to cash in on any of this sweet karma, but here's mine. When I was 8 I spent the night at my cousin's house and they rented Fire in the Sky, a purportedly true movie about a man on a logging community who was abducted by aliens in the mountains about 4 hours from my house. To say this movie scared the hell out of me was an understatement. I couldn't sleep at all for days. I couldn't sleep well for months. I couldn't be alone in a room. I couldn't go outside at night for fear that I was going to be taken. I had recurring nightmares of being abducted the same way the guy in the movie was. Fast forward a few years to when I'm 11. This crippling phobia has mostly come under control with supreme effort on my part. Side note, I contribute my love of sci-fi books and movies to trying to get over this by reading everything I could about aliens. I can now go outside at night, though I still often feel spooked and have overwhelming urges to sprint back inside the house. One night while having my usual nightmare, the first in a long time, I feel reality start to intrude on the nightmare. I'm cold, shivering, and the dream ends. When I open my eyes, I'm sitting on a lawn chair on the back porch of the house. I calmly and rationally think I must have been sleepwalking. Trying to keep my panic under control, I go to our sliding glass back door, only to find out that the door, which can only be locked from the inside, was locked. This destroys what's left of my calm, and I start pounding on the door to have someone let me in. My mom came to the door and let me in, and asked why I went outside. After discussing what had happened with them, we all decided that I had sleepwalked to the back door, unlocked it partially, enough to open the door, and when I shut it behind me it clicked closed, even though we could never replicate that. My mom to this day claims to have heard the back door open seconds before I started pounding on it for them to let me in, so I guess that's plausible. This all happened 22 years ago, and as far as I know I haven't suffered any long-term effects other than being a die-hard nerd, possibly much more than I would have been. First, sorry, English is not my main language. I'm Mexican. This story happened many years ago. I was almost 12 years old. Me and my family lived in an old building near downtown Mexico City. Even though our apartment was always clean, there were roaches coming from other apartments. It was difficult to get rid of those bugs. We used pest control sprays and things like that, but these bugs were always coming back. One night we were sleeping, everyone in their own room. I was sleeping comfortably in my bed when I heard a deep voice saying, "Levantate, wake up." And that's what I did. Immediately a big roach fell in my pillow, exactly where my head was resting a few seconds ago. I said, "Geez, that's disgusting!" This could have fallen in my face. I tried to kill it, but this bug ran and hid under my bed. Could not find it. Don't know exactly what happened. Who or what was that voice warning me about this flying roach? Was it a guardian angel? I hate roaches. I used to get sleep paralysis fairly often, but nothing freaky ever happened besides my inability to move/speak, except for this one time. I was laying on my back trying to fall asleep when all of a sudden my head jerked to the side. I didn't like the way it felt, so I went to move my head back, but I couldn't move. It was a summer night and I had a fan in my window by the bed. All of a sudden there is this low rumbling and the sound of rushing wind. I tried my hardest and was able to force my eyes open a crack, to see that my curtains were sucked tightly to the window/fan as if air were being forced from my room rather than being blown into my room by the fan. That's when I felt something around my ankles. I tried to untangle it, but I couldn't, and I felt as though I was slowly being pulled off of my bed. Then I snapped out of it. I was laying in the center of my bed, my covers were on the floor, and my curtains were gently blowing inward from my window fan, but my heart was pounding. Shut was weird. I can see why some researchers theorize that people who claim to have been abducted actually just suffer from episodes of sleep paralysis. I was about 7 and was on the bus with my little sis and mum on the way to school. My sis was only a few months old at the time, so my mum had to sit at the front with the pram. I was in the middle somewhere with 2 guys behind me and a nice old lady next to me. So everything was going good, me playing Pokemon on my DS. Then the lady got off and that left me with the creeps behind me. It was fine for a while except for the strong tobacco smell, but then I hear guy 1 tell guy 2 something to laugh. Not sure what, but then guy 2 leans over and whispers in my ear, "Would you like to sleep and be woken up at night?" Like WFT, it made no sense, but I just got a serious bad feeling about them. So I just tried to ignore them. Ya know, because never talk to strangers. Guy 1 then says loud enough for me and guy 2 to hear, "Not much a talker then." A few minutes later we got off the bus and headed to school. I didn't tell my mom anything because I just thought, yeah, okay, whatever. But then later, whilst at lunch and break, I couldn't help but feel watched. I'd still if it was just me being paranoid or what, but yeah. Going home, I again was on the bus, and halfway home, you know when bus drivers see a fellow bus driver and they slow down and yell hi out the window? Well yeah, that happened, and what do I see through the window? The same guys. They just kinda looked at me weird, then smiled, not like the sweet, "Oh yeah, hi, I've seen you before" smile, but the "I'm gonna kill you in your sleep" smile. For like weeks after that at lunches at school I had an "I'm being watched" feeling, which I just narrowed down to paranoia. But yeah, after like a month everything went back to normal, but it was probably the creepiest thing to happen to me. Not really paranormal, but when I was 18 I went through opioid withdrawal. My psychiatrist had me crazy medicated. I was going in a month to get a brain scan, and we decided it would be best to wean off the medication to get an honest brain scan. My doctor failed to let me know I was on an opioid, so when he gave me misinformation on how to get off the prescriptions, I went through the scariest thing in my life. I had multiple hallucinations, both visual and auditory. You're not able to differentiate between what is real and what's fake, so everything just appears real. I went to try and take a bath and I had chunks of skin falling off my hand. I screamed in terror, not knowing if it was actually happening or if I was still in some fever dream. It turned out to be real. Also, the fully conscious seizures. You are pretty much constantly shaking as your body temperature is insanely hot and cold all at once. You also sweat profusely and are constantly disgusting. I couldn't really move around much or walk without help or some sort of support. Also, not being able to eat for 3 days mixed with the constant throwing up and diarrhea is a nice cherry on top of the shit cake. If you have ever seen Requiem for a Dream or Trainspotting, it's exactly like that. 0-10 would not recommend. I lost 10 pounds in 3 days, so I guess that was kind of nice. When I was about 8, I moved from an upstairs bedroom to what was the family den downstairs. My parents put up some wall-mounted shelves for my piggy bank, coffee can filled with pennies, my books, and a long swing arm lamp clamped to the end, so I could read in bed. It was late, my mom and sister were out, and I could hear my dad snoring in the living room. As I was reading, I kept thinking I was seeing an orange light about 35 feet outside my window. I would turn, and it would go away. So I shifted my book, and pretended to read while I side-eyed out my bedroom window. After 20 seconds, I saw the orange light up and then drop down. There was someone outside my window smoking a cigarette watching me. I was too terrified to walk by that window to tell my dad, so I just froze in bed and started quietly calling out, "Dad." As I did that, the cigarette moved 15 feet closer to my window. "Dad," more snoring, and the cigarette went out of my view again. About a minute later, I heard the crunch of feet on some brush just outside my window, and from the light over my bed I saw 2 hands and then a man's face inches from the glass. "Dad." 2 seconds later, my pop came into my room swinging a golf club. I screamed, "There's a man outside the window." My dad grabbed my lamp and pulled it toward the window. This released the shelf from its base, and like a fucking Rube Goldberg machine, I was instantly bombarded with the coffee can of change and all of my books. I was already crying, but now I was screaming, as I thought I was being attacked. My dad tossed the light on the ground and said, "Stop crying, and clean up. I'm going to take out the garbage." I felt like an idiot, and was scared and covered in about $12 in pennies. My mom got home 45 minutes later, and both my dad and I told her conflicting stories. My dad went out a few times that night to check on the garbage. 5 years later, I rode my bike over to my best friend's house. His much older brother said, "I should steal your bike to teach your dad a lesson." I asked him what that meant. He said, "I used to sleep with your babysitter after you two went to bed. And one night your dad ran out, chased me out of your yard and took my 10-speed. I had to walk home." I asked my dad about it, and he went into great detail. "Oh yeah, I found a bunch of cigarette butts, and a bike. I locked up the bike at first, but I didn't want whoever was out there breaking into our garage, so I just propped the bike up on our fence out front." I asked why he never told me, and he just said, "I didn't want to scare you." Came home late one night in high school prob after midnight. We live in a 2-family home, grandparents upstairs and my family downstairs. My grandparents were away at the time. When I came home, the garage door was open. I figured someone left it by accident or left it for me to get in. We lived in a quiet suburb town, so a lot of people never locked doors. I cut through the garage and went in, though my grandparents leveled to the door leading downstairs. I didn't hear the screen door to the garage close. At first I didn't notice it, but as the garage door was closing, I hit the button. It suddenly stopped. Someone must have tripped the safety sensor. I froze at the top of the stairs, and when I realized the screen door never closed, I screamed at the top of my lungs and ran downstairs. My stepfather came running and I said someone was in the house. He of course thought my 17-year-old self was crazy or drunk or both. He went up and checked and said no one was there. My mother and I went upstairs, searches around, and right by the door to get in and out of the garage was a coat closet with sliding doors. Well, the door was wide open. Coats pushed to one side like someone was hiding in it. Also, a planter in the hallway was knocked over, dirt everywhere, and drawers were opened in my grandparents' bedroom. We realized that there was someone about 1 foot away from me when I came in. Luckily they just let me walk by and ran out. We never told my grandparents, didn't want to scare them. We just had locks installed on the inside door to the house from the garage. After that I always had someone walk me to my door / wait for me to get inside before they drove off. This comes to mind because of some other people talking about bad feelings about things. I've mentioned this before somewhere a while back, but here goes. A few years ago, me and my parents went to our family's vacation home, which was several hours away by car. My dad had to go earlier than us, so we traveled in separate cars. I rode down with my mom. When we were going back from the trip, they asked who I wanted to go back with. It was pretty arbitrary, so I just picked my dad because I'd come down with my mom. My mom left about 15 minutes or so before we did. As we're driving, we get a call and find out my mom hydroplaned. It was raining, and rolled her car I think 5 times. It landed on the passenger side. My mom is okay now, but at the time was injured very badly, and the situation was dire. The eerie part of this in relation to myself is that the passenger side of her car, where I would have been sitting, was entirely crushed in, meaning that if I hadn't just decided on a whim to ride with my dad, I had little doubt that I'd be dead. And to add to the creepiness, my mom told me later that she was going to tease me about not riding with her but had a feeling she shouldn't. Can't say whether or not her teasing me would have made me change my mind, but I'm glad she decided against it. For me it was when I was 15, I had an alternative style. Back then it was now it's common, and most of the time my hair wore some strange color and haircut. So this time it was mid-length colored bright pink/red. I am in the bus returning home from school and there is an 60-plus-year-old man looking at me. He comes besides me and starts complimenting my hair. I thanked him and hit the button because it was time to get off on the next stop. He continued talking to me like how old am I, if I did my hair myself, I had, how I am at school etc. and I respond politely but not encouragingly, cause I didn't feel comfortable to continue the conversation. And he got off in my stop. Don't think it was his stop too. He continued to talk to me, and I was embarrassed to just leave, though it would seem rude, I should have done it. He then proceeded to ask me if I had a boyfriend, I froze, and that he should take me for a ride with his car. At this point I understand I got to really go, so I thank him but I have to decline, saying have a good day and turning around to leave. I was 5 minutes from my home on foot. He starts immediately fooling me and still speaking. Couldn't hear what he was saying. I didn't want him to see where I live so I continued walking 2 blocks past my house. He is still fooling me, and then out of nowhere I see a friend of mine. I almost run to her and tell her what has happened and ask her to walk with me to pretend that we are together until he leaves. He followed us 1 more block so we speed up and then turned again until he lost us. I thanked her so much. She came with me till my house and continued to go to hers. I don't think I will forget how much I freaked out that day. I know there were many things I could have done but I was 15 and I completely blanked. When I was little, I think I was about 6, my twin sister and I were dropped off home by our friend's mom when we were meant to go to her house to be picked up by our parents instead. We live in the countryside so we were absolutely petrified when we realized that we were locked out of the house and totally alone. My twin sister and I used to see a shadow figure every now and then. We called him the Shadow Man. Very original, I know. And he used to be totally black and wear a top hat. We even saw him in the daylight sometimes. After spending about 5 minutes banging on the door and crying for our mom to open it, we were in denial for about 10 minutes that they weren't home. We saw him following us as we wandered around the property. My twin sister had her arms around me protectively and was trying to comfort me, and we were like that until our dad came home. We never saw the Shadow Man ever again after that. I'm 99% that he was just a figment of our imagination, but there's just 1% that believes he may have been real, as both my twin sister and I used to see him. One day last year we were talking about that day, I can't remember why, and she said randomly, "Do you remember when we used to see the Shadow Man following us?" I'll try to make this brief. When I was 9 or 10, the room I stayed in as a child had the bed facing the doorway. I awoke one night between maybe midnight and 2 a.m. to see a large hooded figure standing in my doorway staring directly at my bed. I was too terrified to scream or run to my parents, so I froze up and dipped my head back under the covers waiting for it to go away. This happened 3 or 4 more times in about a year period. Every time the figure was either in the doorway or at the foot of my bed. And it got to the point I knew my mind was messing with me, so I would just try to ignore it and go back to sleep rather than alerting my parents of some intruder. I have a younger brother, 8 years my junior. Fast forward and I am now 18 and headed off to college, and he is 10 and moved into my old room because it was bigger and now available with me being moved out. At this point I had been gone a few months and I get a call at 1:30 a.m. from my brother. He is whispering, but sounds terrified. He says he can see a dark figure standing at the foot of his bed, but it's blocking the doorway so he can't get my parents. To this day I don't know what possessed him to call me rather than scream, run to my parents, or react in any other way a 10-year-old may. At this point I realized what he was seeing and told him to get under the covers and go back to bed when I was sufficiently convinced there wasn't an actual human intruder in the home. He and I are both adults now and have only discussed this once since it occurred. But he mentioned to me that he never screamed for my parents because it had happened before and he knew it wasn't real. I think my 10-year-old brother was basically giving me a middle of the night phone call to go, "Hey dude, your room is pretty haunted, right?" I have another brother and a sister that both stayed in that room during their childhood and have no recollection of an experience like that. I have a hard time believing in the supernatural, ghosts, gods, demons, anything I don't have a real tangible grasp on, but that shared experience with him still makes me question all of it to this day. This was a very long time ago, though the main facts are burned in my brain. When I was 5, Me and my family moved into a new home, and I had a very bad feeling about it. Even now, 8.5 years later, I still do. I hated going out of my room, cause I always felt watched. From the time 6:30 a.m. to 8:00 a.m. I felt safe. For some weird reason, I could wander all around the house and not feel watched. It doesn't help Mom stacked her white and black towel on a hook, and it always looked like a little girl staring at me through the bathroom. Anyways, to this exact story. It was winter, 3rd or 4th January, and I had started school, 4th grade, tomorrow from out winter vacation. The time was around 10:25 to 10:30 p.m. and I was on my phone, browsing Instagram before I went to sleep. Being sleepy, I put it down and basically listened into the silence of my home. Mom and my little brother were asleep already. I've always hated silence, so it was majorly unsettling for me. I put on some music, hugged a few of my stuffed toys and tried to sleep, but to no avail. There was light tapping on my window, but I ignored it since I've had a thing for hearing stuff when I'm scared. I turned again, and the tapping grew louder. I was scared to get up and open my thick, silky orange curtains, despite having a decently bright night light for my sleeping in the dark troubles. The tapping stopped after I sat up, and just stared at my window. It felt like an eternity, but I finally laid down and tried to sleep. The tapping started again, but I just ignored it. I eventually fell asleep after seemingly hours of torture with the tapping. The next morning when I woke up, there were heavy scratches on both of my windows, with a few words engraved. I remember them exactly. Not today. We got my windows replaced and I haven't had something like that since. This happened more than 3 years ago and I still don't know what really happened. I was driving home from a friend's house around 3 a.m. He lives in a small town outside the city about 25 minutes from my house. There are no street lamps in this whole town, so nights are very dark and creepy as it is. The only light I had were my car lights in front of me. As soon as I leave his block there is a long stretch of road, like 10 minutes driving, of nothing but 2 lanes for cars coming and going. On each side of the road there's nothing but tall grass that goes on for a few miles, so at 3 a.m. there was nothing to see but the darkness of the night. As soon as I got onto this road I got the spooks and chills. I had the feeling that there was someone in the car with me. I was getting kinda scared and the only other car in my lane was far ahead, so I sped up to try and catch up to them so I wouldn't feel so alone. I caught up to the car and was driving fairly close, then suddenly I noticed another car show up and drive close behind me, which made me feel a little safer. Then out of nowhere I got the chills really bad again. I looked at my rearview mirror and saw a black shadowy face in my back seat. I got so scared that I swerved my car a little. I froze, and then slowly looked behind me, but there was nothing there. As soon as I looked back to the front of my car there was a really bright light that blinded me. I closed my eyes until the bright light was gone. Then once I was able to see again I noticed that both cars in front of me and behind me were gone. There was nowhere they could have gone. There was no exit or different road for a few of miles. After realizing that the cars actually just vanished I noticed I was sweating really bad, breathing heavily, and my heart was pounding so hard I felt like I was going to have a panic attack. I drove as fast as I could all the way home. That was 3 years ago and to this day I can't think of a reasonable explanation. When I was in high school I would walk home about a mile on a street that very few people took. It was my only way home, so I just put my headphones in and did it. One day a black car pulled up next to me and asked if I wanted a ride. It was a male voice but I didn't see who was inside it. I declined and he left. I happened to be about a block away from home, but I didn't want to lead the man to my house, just in case he doubled back, because I would be alone. So, I just started to walk down the street I was next to because I knew I could cut across a small field and get to my street. As I was cutting across the field I looked back and saw him coming up the decoy street at a slow pace. I booked it home because I was far enough up the street where he wouldn't have been able to see me. It still haunts me. Second story is at my current house, and many years later, I came home from walking my dog and immediately went upstairs and fell asleep. My neighbor had noticed me go in. While I was sleeping someone was looking into my backyard over the fence and looking in my front windows. My neighbor kept an eye on it and told the man he needed to go because no one was home and he'd call the cops if he didn't. When my mom came home from work he flagged her down and asked if I was expecting company. My mom said she didn't think so but she'd ask me. He told her about the man peering into the house and how he sensed something wasn't right. He said he was scared for me and almost came over to see if I was okay right when my mom pulled up. We had never spoken before other than polite hellos. He offered to give his phone number to me because he works from home, so if I ever felt unsafe him or his wife would invite me over. A few days later there were several break-ins in my housing development. I took his number the next time I saw him and thanked him for his kindness. When I was much younger, in my primary school days, it was New Year's Eve and we was at a social club. If you're from the UK it was kind of like the British Legion if you're familiar with it. Around the back of the clubhouse was kind of a walkway, a little bigger than the width of a person. Next to this was a slight hill covered in trees, bushes etc. then a fence that back onto cricket field. Pretty creepy if you're there at night. There weren't many kids there, but I was playing with some family friends outside in the dark. I think we were playing hide and seek or manhunt. We were running around the clubhouse a lot and sort of hiding in the darkness of the night. So you can imagine running down and hiding in the back of the clubhouse was the go-to as it was pitch black. Anyway, I was chasing this girl outside the front of the clubhouse. She turned right down the side of it then right again down the back of it. I was quite a bit behind so I was still catching up. As I turned right down the side of the clubhouse, I see this massive white flash and hear her scream. I obviously shit myself and froze. She came out back the way she ran after what felt forever and her shins all cut up. She said she fell over a log down the back of the alley, turned around and saw a massive white flash then screamed. Safe to say we just went back inside and played pool instead of being out the front. This will probably get buried. My grandfather, his sister, and his wife, my grandmother, all died in the same year. The three of them were very close. My grandfather was the last to die a week after his 88th birthday in November. He died in our house. He was living with us. Shortly after he died, my mom, these were her parents and her aunt, started finding pennies in random places all over the house, and upon closer inspection, all the pennies were from the years 1923, 1925, and 1929. These were the birth years of my grandfather, grandmother, and great-aunt. Then I started finding pennies in random places. Sometimes I would get a feeling I might find one and then I would find one. My mom and I started finding them in Christmas decorations that had been put up after my grandfather died. My mom found some in the attic above the house. The pennies stopped popping up after Christmas. Then the next couple years around Christmas time my mom started to find more pennies. I think this went on for 2 or 3 Christmas times after my grandfather died. My grandfather loved Christmas time, then slowly stopped. My mom still has all the pennies. She almost filled a coffee mug with them. When I was growing up, my grandfather always claimed to be somewhat clairvoyant. He had died and been brought back to life a couple times, and he had claimed to see the ghost of his mother, who died when he was 6. He also had several other paranormal experiences in his life. He was a little eccentric and always joked that he was going to haunt us when he died. So I was about 13 when this happened. I was home alone, my mom, dad, and brother out doing something, and I hear a knock at the door. It being about 7:00 at night, I was slightly concerned. I get a good look at the guy through what I will now call the incognito shutters, and it was a man. Blonde hair, about 6 feet 0 inches, thin as a twig, and wearing a black hoodie. He looked like Karen 4 from Dark Web. What stood out the most to me was that he seemed to be failing at subtly signaling to unseen others. For example, he'd itch his head, exactly 3 times, pause for a second, then itch again, for 3 seconds. Since he seemed weird, my parents not being home, and the darkness, I didn't open the door. Then the lights flicker, the TV goes to static, and I whip open the door and shout, "What the fuck do you want from me?" The man shouts out abort, and 4 other dudes that look like you stereotypical robbers run out from the sides of the house. I slam the door, go to my parents' room, grab his rifle, sit by the TV, and make a big show of loading a bullet into the chamber. A neighbor comes over, asks if I'm okay, and tells me that the police have been notified. Not extreme, but the feeling of dread crawling up my back when the phone lines were cut and the TV going to static is probably the freakiest thing that ever happened to me.